I'm told that he made an unpleasant and non-public gesture to the fans. I wouldn't know personally, but that's what I heard.
In July 1967 at Forest Hills Stadium in Queens, New York, Jimi Hendrix walked onto an outdoor tennis court converted into a concert venue. The previous month, Hendrix had mesmerized the Monterey Pop Festival by setting his guitar on fire. Facing the stage were 12,000 teenage girls dressed in pastel skirts and knee socks who had no interest in Hendrix's pioneering guitar work. Their collective screaming overwhelmed the sound system, chanting endlessly for Davy Jones. Following 8 hostile tour dates, an exasperated Hendrix flashed an obscene gesture at the audience and quit the tour. The unusual pairing of Jimi Hendrix opening for the Monkees had been orchestrated by the band members themselves. While visiting London, guitarist Mike Nesmith had attended a dinner party with John Lennon, where Lennon played a tape of Hendrix's Hey Joe to a fascinated room. Months later, after Micky Dolenz and Peter Tork watched Hendrix perform at Monterey, the Monkees insisted on inviting Hendrix to join their upcoming North American arena tour. That stadium performance in Queens captured the strange divided reality of American popular music in 1967. On one side stood the emerging counterculture and its self-appointed rock critics. This new critical establishment demanded that music be organic, rebellious, and untainted by commercial ambition. To qualify as real art, a band had to come up through dingy basement clubs and write their own songs. On the other side stood the corporate studio system of Hollywood. The executives in those boardrooms viewed teenagers as an eager demographic waiting to be monetized through bubblegum singles and branded merchandise. At the exact center of that cultural divide were the Monkees, assembled by Hollywood executives as a direct calculated copy of the Beatles. Columbia Pictures and its television subsidiary, Screen Gems, wanted a weekly half-hour sitcom that could exploit the commercial goldmine of Beatlemania without having to manage the artistic demands or royalties of genuine rock stars. The studio hired 4 charismatic young men and handed the music production to veteran brill-building songwriters and anonymous session musicians. To the serious music press, this arrangement was an outrage. The phrase Prefab 4 quickly became a slur for the band. The reality on the ground was far more complicated than the critics admitted. While the American rock press complained about the death of artistic integrity, the actual giants of 60s rock saw right through the controversy. The Beatles welcomed the Monkees to London with elaborate parties and praised their comedic timing. Frank Zappa publicly defended the quality of their singles, pointing out that their studio arrangements were tighter and more adventurous than most of the psychedelic bands operating in San Francisco. The executives who designed the project made a fundamental calculation error. They hired 4 ambitious, musically capable young men and handed them the biggest promotional platform in the country, assuming they would remain compliant employees. Instead of accepting their roles as TV actors who lip-synced for a paycheck, the 4 members mutinied. They revolted against their dictatorial music supervisor, seized control of the recording studio, and produced a #1 garage rock album where they played every instrument themselves. They also introduced modular synthesizers to the top of the pop charts before nearly all of their rock contemporaries. But before the Monkees could wage war against the most powerful studio executives in Los Angeles, those same executives had to bring them together in the first place.
Yes, I'd do anything for you.
In the summer of 1964, the American entertainment industry suffered a collective panic attack. When the Beatles released their debut feature film, A Hard Day's Night, Hollywood executives were caught completely flat-footed. United Artists had financed the movie on a tiny $500,000 budget, viewing it simply as a cheap promotional vehicle to exploit the soundtrack rights before the Liverpool fad faded. Instead, the film became an international box office sensation and a critical triumph. American teenagers bought millions of vinyl records and stampeded movie theaters. Traditional Hollywood television networks looked at this youth explosion and realized they had no idea how to talk to the post-war generation. Sitcoms in the mid-1960s were produced by old men in 3-piece suits, churning out formulaic family comedies in the vein of Leave It to Beaver. The idea of teenagers having their own autonomous culture was still baffling to network executives. 2 young men in Hollywood saw the opportunity. Bob Rafelson was an ambitious young director who had spent years pitching an idea for a show about an itinerant, out-of-work music group trying to make it in the world. Nobody in the old studio hierarchy had cared. But after Beatlemania, Rafelson partnered with Bert Schneider, a sharp young producer whose father ran Columbia Pictures. Together, they formed Raybert Productions and began putting together their TV show. Their plan was to bypass established rock groups and treat their production like casting a Broadway ensemble. In September 1965, Rafelson and Schneider placed a classified notice in Daily Variety and The Hollywood Reporter. The casting call sought 4 eccentric folk and rock musicians between the ages of 17 and 21 to take on leading roles in an experimental TV comedy. 437 young men answered the call. The auditions were a chaotic marathon of screen tests, improv exercises, and musical auditions. Rafelson and Schneider were looking for 4 completely distinct comedic archetypes who could bounce off each other. First came Davy Jones. Jones was a diminutive, charming Englishman who had already achieved professional stage fame, earning a Tony nomination as the Artful Dodger in the Broadway production of Oliver. By an extraordinary stroke of pop cultural timing, Jones had actually shared the stage on The Ed Sullivan Show the very night the Beatles made their American television debut in February 1964. Jones was already signed to Columbia's record division, making him the automatic centerpiece of the project. Next was Micky Dolenz. Dolenz had been a child star a decade earlier, leading the 1950s Saturday morning adventure show Circus Boy under the stage name Mickey Braddock. As a young adult, he was studying architecture and fronting a garage rock band called Mickey and the One-Nighters, playing bowling alleys around Los Angeles. Because the project already had plenty of guitar players, they told Dolenz he was now the band's drummer. Having spent his childhood learning new skills for TV, Dolenz hired a drum teacher and learned the instrument from scratch. To provide musical credibility, they found Michael Nesmith. Nesmith was a sharp-witted Texan folk country songwriter who hosted open mic nights at the Troubadour Club in West Hollywood. Nesmith brought an acerbic, dry intelligence and genuine songwriting talent, having already written Different Drum, a song that would soon become a hit for Linda Ronstadt and the Stone Ponies. The 4th spot went to Peter Tork. Tork was a multi-instrumentalist folk musician and dishwasher from Greenwich Village. He didn't even know about the audition until his close friend, future folk rock icon Stephen Stills, tried out for the part. When the casting directors told Stills his teeth and receding hairline weren't photogenic enough for television, Stills told them he knew a guy who had the right look and could play nearly any stringed instrument. Tork went in for the screen test and was quickly cast as the lovable, naive foil of the group. Screen Gems had recently purchased Alden Music, a publishing house run by Don Kirshner, a brash New York music executive known across the industry as the man with the golden ear. Kirshner was named head of a new division, Colgem's Records, and was given unilateral authority over the band's sound. He commissioned New York's elite brill-building songwriting teams, including Carole King and Jerry Goffin, Tommy Boyce and Bobby Hart, and a young Neil Diamond to write the hooks. To record the tracks, Kirshner booked Western Recorders on Sunset Boulevard and hired the most skilled collective of studio players in the country, the Wrecking Crew. To complete the TV fantasy, the producers needed an eye-catching vehicle. They contacted Dean Jeffries, Hollywood's legendary custom car builder. Jeffries took 2 brand-new Pontiac GTO convertibles and built the Monkeemobile in just 4 weeks. Jeffries stretched the nose, added a split windshield, installed a 3rd-row bench seat where the trunk had been, and mounted a massive drag racing parachute to the back. The Model Products Corporation would go on to sell over 7 million model kits of the Monkeemobile to American kids. The show was set to air on NBC in the fall of 1966. The strategy was airtight. Hollywood had built the ultimate pop commodity, and every single part of the machine was moving exactly according to plan. When the Monkees premiered on NBC on September 12, 1966, the rest of American TV comedy was visually stagnant. Standard network sitcoms were produced like filmed stage plays using the multi-camera setup popularized over a decade earlier. Directors strictly adhered to conservative network formulas and studio union rules. Bob Rafelson and Bert Schneider threw out the entire production manual. They brought in James Frawley, an actor and director who had honed his craft with the New York improvisational troupe The Premise. Frawley put the Monkees through rigorous improvisational workshops, training them to bounce off one another's quirks and react on impulse. 29 of the first 32 episodes were handed to first-time TV directors. The production pace was frantic. The crew took handheld 16mm cameras out onto the streets of Los Angeles and shot on the run. The visual style was pulled directly from the French New Wave. The episodes moved with rapid jump cuts, sped-up footage, Dutch angles, and sudden tonal shifts. The characters broke the fourth wall constantly, talking directly to the viewer, arguing with the director off-screen, or pointing out that they were standing on a soundstage in front of fake scenery. Older guest actors who were accustomed to traditional studio discipline were frequently shocked at the production environment. At the 1967 Emmy Awards, the Monkees won 2 major categories: Outstanding Comedy Series for Rafelson and Schneider, and Outstanding Directorial Achievement in Comedy for James Frawley's direction of the premiere episode. The most lasting innovation of the broadcast was the musical vignette, known around the production as the romp. In every episode, the weekly plot would abruptly stop for a 3-minute musical sequence. The 4 actors would run through amusement parks or dance across Southern California beaches, all cut tightly to the rhythm of a brand new pop single. These romps operated as standalone promotional films designed to sell singles. In an era when pop music on television was restricted to static stage performances on American Bandstand or The Ed Sullivan Show, these sequences established the fundamental editing grammar of modern music videos 15 years before the launch of MTV. The music driving these visual romps was engineered with equal precision. Screen Gems publisher Don Kirshner gave songwriting partners Tommy Boyce and Bobby Hart a mandate to create irresistible pop tracks that could compete with the British invasion on Top 40 radio. Boyce and Hart responded with the band's self-titled theme song and their debut single, Last Train to Clarksville. On the surface, Last Train to Clarksville sounded like a bright, upbeat piece of jangly pop, but beneath the cheerful melody, Boyce and Hart buried a dark, topical subject. Clarksville, Tennessee is located right outside Fort Campbell, where thousands of young American draftees were being processed before being deployed to the escalating war in Vietnam. The song's narrator is a young soldier waiting at a train depot for a brief final meeting with his girlfriend, pleading for her to see him because he does not know if he will ever return. Because commercial radio stations routinely banned explicitly anti-war records, the songwriters buried the soldier's dread inside an upbeat radio-friendly dance single. The commercial calculation worked. Last Train to Clarksville entered the charts in late September and climbed to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in early November 1966. Simultaneously, the band's self-titled debut album seized the number 1 spot on the Billboard 200, embarking on a massive 13-week run at the top of the charts. The manufactured TV band had completely conquered the American music industry. By the beginning of 1967, the commercial momentum of the Monkees had outgrown the TV show that created them. The band's next single, I'm a Believer, written by Neil Diamond, shipped over 1 million advance copies ahead of release. The record hit number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 on the final day of 1966 and stayed there for 7 consecutive weeks, becoming the biggest-selling single of 1967. Across that 12-month stretch, the Monkees achieved staggering commercial dominance. Their first 2 albums, The Monkees and More of the Monkees, locked down the number 1 position on the Billboard 200 for 31 consecutive weeks. They moved more than 10 million albums in a single year, outselling the Beatles and the Rolling Stones combined. For the executives at Columbia Pictures and Screen Gems, the business model had succeeded beyond their wildest projections. Yet just as the records conquered the airwaves, the intellectual framework surrounding popular music changed. The mid-60s witnessed the emergence of serious rock journalism. Newly founded publications like Crawdaddy and Rolling Stone were establishing a new cultural orthodoxy. To these young critics, rock and roll was treated as a serious art form. This emerging critical establishment demanded strict adherence to artistic authenticity. In that critical framework, the Monkees were public enemy number one. The rock press branded them the Prefab Four, treating the group as a cynical corporate fraud. The critics argued that by buying Monkees records, young listeners were being manipulated by marketing executives in Hollywood suits who were commercializing the youth movement. Inside the recording facilities in Los Angeles, the four performers faced daily humiliation. While the four actors were mobbed by screaming crowds wherever they traveled, they had zero authority in the recording studio. Don Kirshner kept the control room doors locked. During one session at RCA, Peter Tork brought his bass guitar into the studio, hoping to lay down a track. Producer Jack Keller looked up from the console and told Tork to pack up his gear and leave, explaining that union session musicians had already tracked the parts. Mike Nesmith faced the same brick wall, despite being a seasoned guitarist and songwriter who had already written hits for other artists. The tension soon split the four members internally. Davy Jones, who had come up through the disciplined, practical world of British musical theatre, viewed the project as any other acting job. Jones was grateful for the steady paycheck and argued that interfering with a proven commercial formula was reckless. Nesmith and Tork, coming out of the folk coffeehouse circuit, felt like frauds. The four young men were trapped inside a lucrative corporate machine, and the clash between studio executives and the band was heading straight for an open confrontation.
Yesterday was the most horrible day of my life.
Easy, baby, easy. Wait to see the footage on the party scene. You were beautiful.
In January 1967, while the four Monkees were on a brief touring break, Don Kirshner made a unilateral decision that shattered the fragile peace between the band and the studio. Without notifying the four performers, Kirshner compiled 12 unreleased studio tracks and rush-released the band's second album titled More of the Monkees. The album's presentation was an open insult to the group. Rather than organizing a dedicated photo shoot, Kirshner grabbed an outtake from a recent promotional photo session the cast had done for a JCPenney clothing line. Worse, Kirshner authored the album's liner notes himself. On the back cover, he dedicated multiple paragraphs to praising his brill-building songwriting stable and his own publishing brilliance. The four members only discovered the album existed when they saw it displayed in a record store window while on tour. For Mike Nesmith and Peter Tork, this was the breaking point. The band was generating millions of dollars in record and television revenue for Columbia Pictures, yet they were being excluded from the creative process entirely. In late January 1967, Kirshner summoned the four band members to a private suite at the Beverly Hills Hotel to quiet the rebellion. Kirshner attempted to settle the dispute with cash. He placed 4 royalty checks on the coffee table, each written for $250,000, a small fortune in 1967. Kirshner explained that if the 4 young men simply smiled for the cameras, cut their vocal tracks when called, and stopped questioning the studio arrangements, the money would keep coming. Nesmith pushed the checks aside. He told Kirshner that the group would no longer accept being locked out of the studio. They demanded the right to choose their own material, write their own songs, and play their own instruments on future albums. Screen Gems legal counsel Herb Moelis intervened. He looked directly at Nesmith and warned him to check the fine print of his contract, reminding him that he was an employee of the studio and subject to immediate firing and financial ruin if he breached his agreement. Nesmith lost his temper and punched a hole in the wall inches from Moelis's head. Nesmith and Tork then walked out of the hotel suite. The revolt was underway, but Kirshner still controlled the publishing rights. In his determination to reassert authority, he made a fatal administrative error. In February 1967, Kirshner moved ahead with the band's next single without getting corporate clearance from Raybert Productions or Screen Gems management. He pressed copies of a new Neil Diamond composition titled A Little Bit Me, A Little Bit You, and paired it with a B-side called She Hangs Out. To ensure the record reached the airwaves before the band could object, Kirshner bypassed standard Columbia distribution pipelines and shipped 500,000 advance copies directly to radio stations and retail stores. That unauthorized release gave Rafelson and Schneider the legal grounds they needed to help the band take control of the recording studio. By distributing commercial master recordings without the corporate sign-off of Screen Gems, Kirshner had violated his executive contract. Bert Schneider went directly to his father, Columbia president Abraham Schneider, and demanded that Kirshner be fired immediately. On February 27, 1967, Screen Gems officially dismissed Don Kirshner as head of Colgems Records and revoked all his authority over the Monkees. 4 young television actors had forced out the most powerful music publisher in Hollywood, but their victory brought an immediate test. Having seized control of the recording studio, they had to prove they could make a hit record entirely on their own. In February 1967, Mike Nesmith walked into the Whiskey A Go-Go on the Sunset Strip. On the crowded stage, California pop group The Turtles were performing their brand new hit, Happy Together. Nesmith watched their bass player, Chip Douglas. Between sets, Nesmith approached Douglas at the bar and made an unexpected proposition: leave the Turtles, move over to RCA Victor, and become the full-time record producer for the Monkees. Douglas accepted the offer. Starting in late February 1967, the band set up camp in RCA Victor's Studio C with Chip Douglas behind the board. Over the next 6 weeks, the 4 musicians worked long hours to construct a complete studio album entirely on their own. The studio floor was noisy and experimental. When the final master tapes were completed, Nesmith remarked to the studio crew that the wooden puppet had finally cut its strings and become a real boy. Their self-made LP headquarters arrived in record shops in late May 1967. Colgems distributed the record without an advance single to build radio momentum. The record was an immediate commercial success, selling over 2 million copies in its first 8 weeks. On June 24, 1967, headquarters climbed to number 1 on the Billboard 200. Their stay at the very top lasted exactly 1 week. On July 1, 1967, the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's took over the number 1 position on the charts. For 11 consecutive weeks throughout the Summer of Love, headquarters held steady at number 2, sitting directly beneath Sgt. Pepper. The chart battle highlighted a strange contradiction in the music industry. While American rock critics continued to dismiss the Monkees as a synthetic product, the British rock establishment treated them as peers. When the group arrived in London, the Beatles attended a late-night party for them at the Speakeasy Club. John Lennon spent hours talking with Nesmith, praising the group's comedic timing and comparing their TV energy to the Marx Brothers. George Harrison invited Peter Tork into the studio to play banjo for his Wonderwall soundtrack. The musicians defining 60s rock did not share the same moral outrage as American music critics. The band's studio experimentation expanded beyond traditional rock instrumentation. In the late summer of 1967, Micky Dolenz purchased a modular synthesizer directly from its inventor, Robert Moog. It was one of the first 20 modular units ever manufactured. Dolenz had the synthesizer installed in his home, spending weeks learning how to manipulate its oscillators, filters, and envelopes. In October 1967, he brought the Moog into Western Recorders in Hollywood during the tracking sessions for the band's 4th album. Dolenz patched together a series of eerie, resonant synthesizer sweeps for a Nesmith composition called Daily Nightly. When the album hit stores in November 1967, it became the first number 1 album in history to feature a Moog synthesizer, making Dolenz the first musician to play a modular synth on a commercial pop record. By the end of 1967, the Monkees had landed 4 number 1 albums on the Billboard 200 in a single calendar year, a commercial record that still stands. They had outmaneuvered their corporate studio handlers, proved their ability as musicians, and earned the respect of their British idols. Having secured complete artistic independence, they now faced the question of what kind of art they actually wanted to make.
Here we go, we turn over and we all take our positions in front of the camera, because this is the Monkees and we're really tricky.
By the spring of 1968, the Monkees had grown openly hostile to the television format that had made them famous. Instead of delivering harmless teenage slapstick, the band began turning their Monday night broadcast into a platform for avant-garde subversion. In March 1968, during the show's 2nd season, Michael Nesmith brought avant-garde provocateur Frank Zappa onto the set. The guest spot opened with an absurd role swap. Zappa wore Nesmith's signature knit beanie and buttoned shirt to mimic the teen idol, while Nesmith put on a prosthetic nose and wild wig to impersonate the Mothers of Invention frontman. The two conducted a deadpan interview satirizing network television editing conventions and commercial pop formulas. The sketch concluded with Nesmith waving an orchestral conductor's baton while Zappa picked up a heavy sledgehammer and smashed an old sedan to pieces on camera, synchronized to the Mothers of Invention track Mother People. The TV subversions were only a prelude to an act of deliberate commercial self-sabotage. Exhausted by their manufactured image and determined to escape the teen idol trap, the four members teamed up with Rafelson and a young Jack Nicholson. Rafelson and Nicholson assembled a screenplay designed to dismantle the Monkees' public brand entirely. The result was a 1968 feature film titled Head. Head unfolded as a surreal, nonlinear assault on the commercial entertainment industry that created them. The film shattered the band's clean-cut image by juxtaposing their pop songs with graphic newsreel footage of the Vietnam War. The theatrical release of Head in November 1968 was a commercial catastrophe. The young fans who loved the TV show were alienated by the avant-garde film. The serious counterculture audience, who might have appreciated the film's anti-war satire, refused to buy tickets to a project starring a manufactured TV group. The movie disappeared from theaters within days, recouping only a tiny fraction of its budget and swiftly collapsing the band's career. NBC canceled the television series after 58 episodes across 2 seasons. The band's single sales cratered as Top 40 radio moved toward harder rock and psychedelic sounds. In December 1968, Peter Tork, exhausted by the relentless work pace and disillusioned by the collapse of their artistic credibility, paid $160,000 to buy out the remainder of his studio contract, leaving him personally broke and reducing the band to a trio. Yet the financial success of the Monkees produced one of the most unexpected developments in modern American cinema. Bob Rafelson and Bert Schneider had made millions of dollars from the Monkees' media dominance. With the band finished, the two producers took that capital and formed an independent film production company called BBS Productions. Their first move was to provide $350,000 of Monkees TV profits to 2 young counterculture actors, Dennis Hopper and Peter Fonda. Hopper and Fonda used that money to shoot Easy Rider. Released in the summer of 1969, Easy Rider became an international box office phenomenon, grossing $60 million worldwide and upturning the traditional studio system. Over the next 5 years, the millions generated by the Monkees' bubblegum singles and the success of Easy Rider bankrolled the new Hollywood cinematic movement. BBS Productions financed Rafelson's 5 Easy Pieces, Peter Bogdanovich's The Last Picture Show, and the Academy Award-winning anti-war documentary Hearts and Minds. The corporate pop factory built to sell lunchboxes to teenagers had ended up funding the most radical anti-establishment wave of cinema in Hollywood history.
The best of TV combined with the best of radio. Now, starting right now, you'll never look at music the same way again.
After being ousted from the Monkees in 1967, Don Kirshner realized that the flaw in his pop formula was the human element. If you put real actors in front of television cameras and give them a national audience, they will eventually develop artistic ambitions and punch holes through hotel walls. In 1968, Kirshner solved the problem. He partnered with Filmation and Archie Comics to create a brand new Saturday morning TV band called the Archies. This time there were no egos to manage. The band consisted entirely of animated characters from the comic series Archie, Jughead, Betty, and Veronica. In 1969, the Archies released Sugar Sugar. The bubblegum single became the #1 song of the year in both the US and UK, giving Kirshner yet another chart-topping success story in the TV band format. In 1970, Screen Gems adapted the Monkees' framework for the Partridge Family, casting Shirley Jones and David Cassidy as the faces of another studio-backed pop act. Across the 1970s and 1980s, record labels repeatedly returned to the core casting formula established by Raybert Productions. While the entertainment industry scaled the commercial formula, Michael Nesmith spent the 1970s pioneering the intersection of music and video technology. After leaving the Monkees, Nesmith founded the First National Band, releasing the 1970 album Magnetic South and helping establish the foundation of Southern California country rock. In 1977, Nesmith shifted his focus to video production. When his record label requested a standard promotional clip for his single Rio, Nesmith and director William Deere created a surreal, impressionistic short film that used visual comedy and narrative scenes rather than a standard performance video. Nesmith realized that the music video format itself could be an art form. In 1980, Nesmith pitched a half-hour television program called Pop Clips to Warner Amex executive John Lack. The show featured continuous music videos introduced by comedic video jockeys and aired on Nickelodeon as a successful broadcast test. Lack and programming executive Bob Pittman took Nesmith's format, expanded the structure into a 24-hour cable channel, and launched MTV in August 1981. Nesmith expanded on his artistic video approach in 1981 with Elephant Parts, a full-length video project combining musical tracks with surreal comedy sketches. The release was so influential at the dawn of the MTV era that Nesmith was awarded the first-ever Grammy Award for Video of the Year in 1982. The debate over authenticity that followed the Monkees throughout their career was built on an artificial division. The critics who dismissed the group were measuring them against a romantic standard of purity that rarely existed in commercial recording. The Wrecking Crew session players who backed the Monkees were the exact same musicians working with the most celebrated record producers in Los Angeles in the 60s. The brill-building songwriters providing their hooks were some of the most successful hitmakers of their generation. When those studio resources were handed to 4 performers who insisted on learning their craft and pushing the boundaries of broadcast television, the result was a catalog and legacy that outlived the media ecosystem that created them.